Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Today on Sanctuary, Coping with Grief. We will explore how different faith communities understand grief and what insights their traditions offer to our nation as we struggle with the losses due to the pandemic and racial injustice.
Welcome to Sanctuary, bringing you conversation and stories at the intersection of life and faith. This edition of Sanctuary is produced in cooperation with the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago.
Hello, and welcome to Sanctuary. I'm Nisan Chavkin, Executive Director of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago. Earlier this spring, our nation passed the one-year anniversary of the pandemic. Since that time, we've lost more than 500,000 Americans to COVID-19. This May also marks the one-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. Here in Chicago and across the country, we continue to experience the losses caused by racial injustice. Individually and collectively, our last year has been marked by profound grief. In this episode of Sanctuary, we'll focus on how faith traditions respond to grief, what faith traditions teach, how faith can help us cope personally, and how it can provide us guidance on supporting our families, neighbors, friends, and community. To help me explore these questions, I'm joined today by Ms. Shayda Safapour of the Chicago Bahai community and Bishop Yehiel, Bishop of the Metropolitan Chicago Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Because the threat of the pandemic remains very real and we're doing our part to protect each other, I'll talk with each of our guests one at a time. Let's begin with Ms. Safapour. Shayda, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you, Nisan, and I applaud you and the organizers for having this opportunity to discuss such an important subject and hopefully finding some pathways to healing.
Thank you, and thank you for the wisdom that you will offer us in this conversation. And I guess we should start with you're a member of the Baha'i community, and not everybody knows everything about the Baha'i community, but if you could tell us sort of what is your tradition teach about grief and all the things that go along with it. What is Baha'i anyway?
Definitely. So the Baha'i faith, for those that are new to this religion, the thrust of this faith is unity. The purpose of this religion is to unify the world. And to explain some of the answers I'm going to be giving, I guess I would stress how the progress of this religion is really about the unification of mankind and, the coming together of people of all backgrounds, all races, and regardless of gender or walk of life. The Baha'i faith came out of the Middle East, and it's now one of the most widespread religions. It embraces a lot of diversity because of this emphasis on oneness. And when it comes to grief, I feel like the Baha'i faith has provided an opportunity for me as an individual to reframe perhaps what I would see just as general suffering as an opportunity for growth. Much like how, as Baha'is, we believe that there has been an evolution in religion, we feel that there's an evolution in people, in humanity. But whether we choose to use certain tools to accelerate our growth, or whether we choose to remain in sadness and darkness is up to us. Now, I will also say that these views are coming from a personal experience, from my personal interpretations and reflections. I have no official capacity here. I have no title. We have no clergy, in fact, in the Baha'i faith. So what I have gained, the wisdom I have learned is based sort of on my own exposure and in life experiences.
Got it. So these opportunities for these teachings about grief as an opportunity for growth, is that something that individuals do? Does the community come together in moments of loss? How do you respond? Are there rituals or prayers or moments or occasions that you do? How does that work?
So I think it's interesting because I feel like there's sort of the human element, right? Baha'is, like any race or any human, any religion, would want people to experience that pain, right? I think we all have a different way of grieving. And for some it may be weeping, for some it may be silence, for some it may be rest. So I think it's acknowledging first and foremost the fact that we have been confronted with true and utter pain by virtue of the pandemic, which you mentioned, as well as these sort of onslaught of racial injustices, which we continue to witness. So allowing myself to grieve, I think, is the first step. The Baha'i faith has some beautiful writings, and these teachings have come from Baha'u'llah, who was the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. And only 160 years ago was this faith publicly declared. And in that short span, his writings have been translated into many languages for all the people all around the world who have embraced the faith. And one of the quotations that has helped me states that grief is sent for our own perfecting. I don't think religion will ever absolve us from pain or grief. It's just a part of life. And so when I see this quotation about grief being sent for our own perfecting, it forces me perhaps to look inward and to think about those qualities which I have not had maybe an opportunity to nurture, to hone and to perfect, that would then allow me to be of greater service to humanity. Ultimately, we believe that it's through service to humanity that we can heal, and it's through spiritual growth that we can come together and help one another as one human family.
That's very, very beautiful. And I think that that set of beliefs must have been sorely tested this past year with all the loss that everyone has experienced, not only here, but around the world. Has anything stood out for you, I guess, in the last year or so, or as a piece that you've learned anew, or something that's reinforced and building on what you've already said?
Oh my goodness, it's been tremendous. The learning, I guess the growing pain, right? The growing pain from what we've witnessed in the last year. The pandemic alone, as you mentioned, all the lives that were lost. And then again, these racial injustices, the tragic streak of Black lives that have been lost as a result of police encounters. We have mass shootings. I mean, there's an onslaught of news that permeates and affects our heart and our conscience. In the Baha'i writings, we talk a lot, as we mentioned, about service. There was something that was a really sort of turning point for me, and it was with regard to another quotation I found about the self, and how when we are so focused on ourselves, how I feel, what I need, what I need for justice, what I want for happiness, what I need to get, what I need to touch, what I need to acquire to feel whole. When we put aside the me and focus on the them, it's remarkable how our energy somehow is elevated and our purpose becomes a bit more clear. The quotation I wanted to share with you states from the Baha'i writings that when one is released from the prison of self, that is indeed the greatest relief. And this is a bit of a paraphrase, but when one is freed from the prison of self, that is the greatest release. And I did find that I was in prison during this last year as a result of all this horrible news that came at us from every direction and continues to. But if we can put ourselves in a posture of learning what it is that we can do to improve our spiritual well-being, but also how we can take care of each other. The Baha'i community has been working at great lengths in the Chicago area, globally, in fact, on ways to reach out to vulnerable communities, to educate, to share knowledge, to give love, food distribution. I mean, there's so many ways each of us can help one another, and it's been a remarkably, I think, useful way to heal, again, as a person, when the focus is more on the outwardness rather than inwardness.
No, that's very powerful. I wonder, and I wanted to explore with you these kinds of challenges that we're facing. One is this faceless thing, the pandemic, which traps us, has disrupted everything and trapped us for many months in our homes, and which is one kind of pain and loss. And then there is the visible things we see on television and read in the newspaper and read online of all these losses caused by social injustice. Does your tradition understand these losses differently, or is there something similar or any value you find between those two sets of different experiences with grief?
Oh gosh, so Nisan, these are different types of losses in a sense, right? So my feeling is we have a spiritual crisis with regard to these racial injustices that we've been talking about. The lack of the recognition that we are one human family. And then we have a health crisis, right? A pandemic, which completely deprived us of those things that we used to rely on for feeling normal, for feeling good. And again, I think the idea, the hope is that religion and faith will be instruments for healing, for unification, but also our improvement, not just as an individual, but as a collective whole. So I think these situations that we're faced with now are giving glimmers of hope when we see folks coming together and helping one another. But it's also a harsh realization that we still have to make greater strides in recognizing our inherent oneness. And so this is, it's an ongoing conversation. In the Baha'i faith, we encourage people to use their own language and traditions and culture to find ways to cope. But ultimately, the source of our guidance and wisdom will come from the Baha'i writings, and some of these prayers and quotes that I've shared with you, I think will lay a foundation for many of us as far as reframing, again, a lot of the tragedy that we keep seeing.
Thank you, Shayda, for that closing wisdom. That's going to, I think, be really helpful for me, and I think hopeful also for those of us sharing the program today. Shayda Safapour of the Chicago Baha'i community, we thank you again for joining us. And when we come back, our discussion on coping with grief continues as we sit down with Bishop Yehiel Curry from the Metropolitan Chicago Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon.
Hello, I'm Cardinal Blaise Supich. I got my COVID-19 vaccination, and you should too. It took just a few seconds and was painless. The Food and Drug Administration determined the new vaccines are safe and effective, and the Holy See, as well as the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, has concluded getting the COVID-19 vaccine is an act of love of our neighbor and part of our moral responsibility for the common good. We have lived with the pandemic for many months, and I know we're all getting tired of it. Vaccination is one of the most important ways you can protect your health and the lives of those you love and help bring the pandemic under control. When it is your turn, I urge you to be vaccinated. And remember to do your part by wearing a mask, washing your hands, and watching your distance. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Welcome back to Sanctuary. Today, as we discuss how different faith traditions understand grief and what insights those communities offer to our nation as we struggle with the losses due to the pandemic and racial injustice. Joining us now is Bishop Yehiel Curry from the Metropolitan Chicago Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Bishop Curry, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Lutheran community, that's a lot of people and a lot of pain, I assume. How big is the community here in Chicago, and how has your tradition been coping with this unprecedented tragedy with the pandemic and all the other losses that we've occurred in the last year?
Yes, thank you. The Metropolitan Chicago Synod has 88,000 baptized Lutheran in the Synod. We are in Cook County, Kane County, DuPage County, and Lake County. That's about 170 congregations, as well as what we call new starts, communities that are forming and just starting to organize. How are we coping? I think we're like everyone else. We are relying on our faith, our communities, our families, to continue to have conversations, to make it through what is seen as a very difficult season.
I empathize, and I know how, in my tradition, it's so important in moments of loss and grief to be physically present with those who are in mourning. And that has been all but impossible this year. What has your community been doing to meet that need, and frankly, how to find meaning in the fact that sometimes we have to be so very distant at such a critical moment in our lives?
In both the Lutheran tradition, for which I'm a bishop, and in the tradition of the Black Church in the U.S., for which I'm rooted, there is this sense of a God who journeyed with us in a time of grief. We believe that God, who is incarnate in Christ in the manger and on the cross, means that God is among and with us in times like this, where we're grieving and we're lamenting. In the Holy Scriptures, in the Gospel of Mark, the 15th chapter, we have a moment of solidarity even with Christ where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus even also had his moment of God forsakenness, although God was truly present till the end. And we feel like the same is true for us. So one of the ways it is best to understand community at this time is that God is with us going through this pandemic. God is with us going through this time of lament and strife.
Wow. So that's very helpful. And as we look at how traditions have adjusted and moved and flexed to support other communities and maintain belief, what would you identify as sort of a relearned piece, or maybe even an extra insight, something new that you might have learned from this past year of all this loss, of different ways that tradition has helped you?
It's been a weird time. I'm still kind of new in my new role, and with the pandemic and things that have happened with race relations and political election and turmoil, from a faith perspective, even I've had those moments where if just for a second I was weary, but it feels like right away, whether it was through a call or text or an email, I felt like God has truly been present in that moment. And so I've been really leaning on my faith. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again from our leaders within the Synod, this has been a reoccurring lesson from all of our rostered leaders, is that the church never closes. And so although we're separated by space and we're not worshiping in person, one of the things we've come to realize is that technology has been great at making us feel like the church is still assembled. That although we are scattered, we are still gathered together. And that has been something that it's just been a good feeling that despite the pandemic, in many ways, we still feel together.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I want to explore one of the things you had mentioned, that the pandemic is just one of these many different sources of rupture and loss this past year. And I wondered, in your tradition, are those losses, do they have the same content? Do you understand them differently? Is there value in seeing similarities between these different problems?
Yeah. In many ways, they're similar and different. I will say this, that grief has a way of bringing people together. Mm-hmm. Pain has a way of uniting us. But we have to be careful to understand that the fear of someone being targeted because of the color of their skin is totally different from the fear of someone getting sick as a result of the pandemic. So while they're different, there are ways that we are united when we share burdens. And so we gather together knowing that we've all lost something. But we have to understand that in many contexts, they may be different. So they're separate in many ways, but also united.
Got it. So in that suffering experience, and you spoke eloquently about the idea of God with the suffering people as manifested in the life of Jesus, and being with us through this whole time, are there other lessons that we might find in this suffering? Does suffering itself teach us anything, or is it just something that we have to just get through? What do you think? What's your experience?
God is our strength in these difficult times, not the cause of some pandemic. And so one of the lessons that I think we also try to model is that it's okay. In the Lutheran tradition, we often express confession in our normal worship routine. That's our way of naming our sins. But lamenting is naming our heartache. And we think it's okay to name that heartache as a way of allowing the community to see what's happening in your context. For us, it's like a form of prayer. Renita Weems has a wonderful book called Listening for God. In her book, she talks about using prayer as a discipline, or using journaling as a discipline for prayer. And she lifts up what we call stalking a thought. It's like how we over and over again lament something that's going on. Dr. Weems reminds us that God can handle it. And so we see that lamenting, that being honest about your grief as a form of prayer. And when we lament, we invite others to journey with us and what's aching our hearts.
Cool. Okay. So this journeying process, this lamenting, is a form of opening up, if you will, to allow other people to see where you are so that they can offer you support accordingly, as you say. Am I understanding it correctly?
I think more importantly, part of being community is about immersing with others, but just listening. Sometimes we can't join, but we can definitely listen. What we've come to realize today and what's happening with the racial tensions is that there have been racial disparities throughout the United States since its founding. But videos have allowed those of us who may not have known about it to journey with the communities. And so the same with lamenting, it allows you to be a part of the journey. It allows you to see firsthand. So sometimes it's really just about knowing. It's about other truths being represented and being able to listen and be a part of that community as they express that truth.
I think that is going on the journey and listening are powerful things to share from your tradition. Is there anything else that perhaps as we wind up here as a close, other things that from your tradition that you've found helpful as you support your friends and family and your neighbors, and we try to lift up our community?
There has been some amazing resources as of late that the National Church has produced for us. One is a lament on Emmanuel 9. The other is a lament for Asian hate or anti-Asian hate. We've had just a number of resources that allow us as a community to gather together around scriptures and to remind ourselves of our role, our duty, and our mission. And so I found those resources from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to be a very helpful guide as we journey together during this time.
Well, Bishop, I appreciate your wisdom and sharing all your time with us today. It's been helpful to me, and I'm sure helpful to our viewers as well. So, Bishop Yehiel Curry, thank you so very much for joining us today. We also want to thank again Shayda Safapour from Chicago's Bahai community. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope you found today's discussion helpful. I'm Nisan Chavkin, and we'll see you next time on Sanctuary.
I encourage everyone, in fact, when your time comes and you are invited to get vaccinated, to do so. It's not only for your health, but as the Holy Father has said, it's for the common good, the health of all, that we have a moral obligation to make sure that we stamp out this pandemic. So my hope is that we all will pull together in this time in which our country and the world is suffering. Again, I am so grateful to everyone here at St. Anthony's, and I encourage everyone to get vaccinated.